Thank you very much, Ian. That was terrific. We might move straight on now to our next speaker, and I'm pleased to introduce to you Dr. James McEvoy from the Australian Catholic University. He's a senior lecturer in systematic theology and also member of the Australian Lutheran Roman Catholic Diet. So welcome, James. I can hand those out. Sorry. Thank you. Your staff. If you take that, so you've got about 10 minutes, and probably about 10 minutes conversation at the end. All right.
Thanks very much. Oh, you're great. I've got handouts plus slides, Lord, for everything. Just for a couple of quotes, really, and the structure. So, thanks. My name is James McEvoy. Thanks very much for the invite. I'm very honoured to be here. I address this topic not as a social ethicist as Bruce is, but rather, as Megan said, a systematic theologian, someone interested in reflecting on the faith of the church in a sort of a coherent fashion. And yeah, so that's the approach here. Paul asked me, there's a handout there, and it just has the key points that I want to run through. And Paul asked me to focus on the place of the theological within the broad social conversation on common good. So that's the picture, that's the question. So the approach is sort of necessarily broad, but I think has some really important specific intentions for our theological reflection of the common good. And well, I think what we'll see is the way in which I think our understanding of social goods and transformations, developments in social goods, feed back on the church itself. And I guess that's part of the motivation of this paper, as I'll explain more in a moment. So the first, can you just forget the first? These are the 6 key points. Just to put a definition of what are we talking about? We're talking about common good from our own Catholic theological perspective, just a bit about how theology approaches things, thinks about things, why Paul and Bruce, what triggered Paul and Bruce's attention and an invitation to meet. And so then, so they're all introductory clearly, but I think important in themselves. Then firstly, that some goods are irreducibly social. This is my thought is just deeply shaped by Charles Taylor, the Canadian philosopher's work. So he has this argument, it sits under everything he writes. It's articulated in the first 100 pages of Sources of Self, but he has a really useful article in his collection of 1995 called Philosophical Arguments, and the title of the article, I think it's called Social Goods as Irreducibly Social. And then how does faith, how does the theological perspective address this question of common goods in a pluralist democratic age? And then finally, a really lovely Anna Rowlands quote on the role of theology in the dialogue about common goods. So that's where we're going. So when Catholics think about the whole nature of our humanity, they think, when Christian theology does, we think about it fundamentally in terms of creation and of God's living with human beings in history and the planet in history and salvation. And it's sort of that perspective that common goods arises out of. Gaudium et Spes says, from the beginning of the history of salvation, God chose women and men, not just as individuals, but as members of the community, a community. So the history of salvation as a communal reality and creation as the same. David Hollenbach, a social ethicist, then sort of puts that together and says, the communitarian character of human existence means that the good of each person is bound up with the good of the community. or John the 23rd's Mater Magistra. The common good is defined as the sum total of conditions of social living whereby persons are enabled more fully and readily to achieve their own perfection. So the social goods, the common good, out of which human existence arises. Christian theology looks at, this comes much later. Can you just flick that one back here? That's number 5 or something. Yeah. So what is Christian theology? Christian theology is, well, in Anselm's definition, the term faith-seeking understanding, or Frank Clooney, a Harvard-based Jesuit whose field is comparative theology, and the fascinating nature of his work is that he was born in Nepal and just deeply interested in the dialogue between 13th century Hindu texts and a Roman Catholic perspective, or a theological perspective. So his definition here of theology is quite beautiful. So faith-seeking understanding, he pushes that definition out, and he says a practice in which all 3 words, the faith, the search, and the intellectual goal, have their full force. The faith, the search, and the intellectual goal have their full force and remain in fruitful tension with each other. So that's where I'm coming from here, trying to, so what I see myself as doing is interpreting the faith of the Christian community, both to the church itself. This is the David Tracy 3 Publics of Theology, to the church itself, to the academy, writing things that might be coherent and well worth reading, hopefully, and to the broader society. I guess my focus particularly has been on the first of those, trying to shift things along a little, as you, as you might imagine. What caught Bruce and Paul's attention was an article that I published last year on the signs of the times called Interpreting Social Goods, Interpreting the Signs of the Times, Fostering Social Goods and Historical Transitions. I was deeply involved with Francis in the Plenary Council. And I think people know fairly generally that there was a motion on the Wednesday that was attempting to articulate and to embrace the equality of women and men, but it went down in a fairly dramatic fashion and caused a lot of, let's just call it fuss for the moment, and took a few days to resolve. And attempting, after a while, to try and get over my anger, and or at least to contain it and to think about things, and getting over the ugly polarized politics of it all. I was thinking, but having a think like that, like, what aren't you seeing? And so it's that led me to think about signs of the times and an understanding of this an interpretation of the shifting understanding of the equality of women and men, really from the end of the 18th century and the revolutions through the 19th century, and particularly through the second wave of feminism. So here's a social good that Christianity deeply embraces: equality from the start, everyone being created in the image of God and God's grace equally for everyone. But so a social good that has shifted in our society that the church is struggling to come to grips with. So that was that's my interest there in the way in which social goods feed back on the church itself. So that's sort of the background of where I'm coming from. Great, we're running out of time. So then these 3 points. Firstly, that some goods are irreducibly social. I mean, this is, Ian's just addressed this point in a different way, but it's a deep challenge in our society that is deeply individualist, and that there's huge richness, clearly, in that. We've come to much as Charles Taylor says, we've come to a far deeper sense of authenticity, of my personal search and understanding who I see myself as called to be. So there's huge richness into this turn to individualism, but there's this deep letting go or challenge, at least, of the place of social goods. Taylor's article then, Irreducibly Social Goods, it's called Irreducibly Social Goods, argues against the perspective of welfare economics because of this individual's perspective, because it sees three different strands of thinking within that argument, that it's consequentialist, that it's utilitarian, that it's atomist, and therefore that it understands public goods only insofar as they contribute to the goods of individuals. So in that sense, he calls that decomposable. You know, so something is good only if it benefits individual people. His argument there is that there are goods that out of which the whole society will flourish, and without them it won't flourish, not just as individuals, but as a society itself. One example that I often keep in mind here is just the quality of political debate in our culture. It matters profoundly for the moral quality of the people who grow up within it, within the culture, but it's treated as something else often than that. So Taylor's argument then on the second dot point under number 4 begins with the very reality of human self-understanding. This period of his work is just deeply into philosophy of language, and says that human meaning and human self-understanding only makes sense against the background of meaning, a background which in itself is not located in individuals, but in the broader culture. So an individual's acts and experiences are only intelligible in the light of the culture itself, not determined by the culture itself, of course, but living in and out of that culture. And so his argument then, this is, a 25-page chapter in a few points here, but that methodological individualist accounts of social processes have to break down because they can't cope with this fact. In some sense, perhaps all choices are individual. They are, however, only acts and choices against the background of practices and understandings. So the culture then is a locus within which individual meanings arise. So for him then, some common understandings are undecomposable. It's essential to their being that they are not just for me, or for you, but for us together. So this is, I think, crucial philosophical insight into the reality of what common goods are. But that doesn't, so if there are such realities as social goods, or what we might come together to, well, this is my approach, obviously, what we might come together to understand as common goods, then social goods in themselves are not only useful, but required. So then the next slide, this is number 5, this is my idea. Yeah, great. So how then given that we're living in a pluralist society, different perspectives, how do we come to common goods that we could all agree upon? So this is, again, this is a Taylor argument. This is out of his little book called Secularism and Freedom of Conscience that he wrote with Jocelyn McClure, who was one of his doctoral students at McGill, and who was a support to him in the commission that Taylor and Charles Dukas led. Great, come in, welcome. Lovely to see you. Great. So this is the argument that Taylor and Jocelyn McClure set up there, that citizens of contemporary democracies hold a plurality. This is a pluralist perspective. Hold a plurality of reasonable yet incompatible moral and religious perspectives, or but this is the Rawls perspective, what Rawls calls comprehensive doctrines. That is, we live in a society in which a whole range of religious, secularist people have a range of understandings or understandings of the world, or comprehensive doctrines, as Rawls put it. But states in themselves need to be neutral towards citizens' comprehensive doctrines. It states so they need to allow a space in which people can come with those various comprehensive doctrines and be treated clearly equally with freedom of equality. Yet liberal states are built upon fundamental values about which they are not neutral: human rights, equality, the rule of law, and democracy. So, a set of values: human rights, equality, the rule of law, and democracy. And those values then allow citizens to engage with one another from their own diverse perspectives. So Muslims and Christians and others then can agree on the fundamental values of the state: human rights, equality, the rule of law, and democracy, each from their own perspective with their own unique reasons. This leads then to an understanding of, well, how do you come to agree on what is common good in this society? Ian and I were having a conversation via Zoom on Friday, just going through this stuff and talking. Taylor is an optimist, and I tend to go down that line. It is, and for him, the fundamental category here is about dialogue, that we can come through the political dialogue to understand things in common and to arrive at common goods. So this is not necessarily a process that results in conflict, although there'd be clearly there is lots of tension within it. But so you know, the question is, well, agonistic or not is the question. So that leads me then to my final point about, so where is theology within this? Well, Anna Rowlands' book, The Politics of Communion, has a gorgeous, and this quote is just over the slide. Can we just hit the next slide? Yeah. Thanks, no problem. So, yeah, that's the one. Runs over the next one as well, but we'll just take some time over this. So she says, the theologian emerges as the contemplator actor who narrates a transcendent story of Christian longing and desire. So she's talking about a Christian theologian here, but clearly there will be Muslim theologians and Hindus and others. But this is a particular Christian story. The theologian emerges as the contemplator actor who narrates a transcendent story of human longing and desire, a developing story received again and again from deep empirical attention to texts and to lives through time. So that's her version of scripture and tradition, obviously, very beautifully put. The theologian is implicated in the combined task of discerning these longings, so the Christian interpretation of reality with human longings, and in struggling to explore through reason and through a glass darkly, whether they correspond to worthy goods. So clearly in dialogue with the pluralist culture, whose character can be tested and found to render goodness for the benefit of each of the whole. So again, the picture of a Christian theologian, a Christian community, in dialogue with the broader pluralist culture, listening to the Christian story and its deep meaning for the individual and the group's life, but in dialogue with the struggles and the questions of the present. And it's only in that dialogue and in that connection that we can arrive at a sense of meaning, firstly, but then fundamentally, what are the goods that this society is fostering? She continues then, and over the page, the double diagnostic task for the theologians to disclose the operation of the good that seems to reveal itself in history, and to attend to the conditions that threaten, suppress, distort, and limit the possibility of the life of the good. So that's, I see that as an interpretative task rather than Rowland's agonistic task, an interpretative task and a dialogical task. Thanks, Megan.
Keith. James.
Yeah, thank you to both of our speakers. We've got now almost 15 minutes for conversation, reflection, discussion, and